Ancient Egypt is one of the most fascinating civilizations in human history. It gave the world pyramids, pharaohs, temples, hieroglyphs, mummies, powerful dynasties, monumental architecture, and one of the most enduring symbols of ancient greatness. But how did ancient Egypt become one of the greatest civilizations the world had ever seen? How did a kingdom built around a river create such immense political power, cultural influence, and lasting mystery? And how did a civilization that lasted for thousands of years eventually decline and disappear as an independent power? In this video, we're going to explore ancient Egypt in a simple, clear, and engaging way. From its earliest beginnings to its rise, glory, transformation, and eventual fall. To understand ancient Egypt, we must begin with geography, because Egypt was, above all, a gift of the Nile. Each year, the Nile River flooded its banks and left behind rich, fertile soil. In a region surrounded by desert, this made life possible on a large scale. Agriculture flourished, communities grew, food surpluses appeared, and from those surpluses came hierarchy, administration, religion, and state power. Without the Nile, ancient Egypt as we know it would never have existed. In the earliest periods, people along the Nile lived in separate communities and local kingdoms. But over time, political unification began to emerge. Around 3100 BC, Upper and Lower Egypt were united under a single ruler, often identified as Narmer, sometimes associated with Menes in later tradition. This was a decisive turning point. Egypt was no longer just a collection of river communities. It had become a kingdom. And from that point onward, one of the longest and most remarkable political stories in history began. At the center of Egyptian civilization stood the pharaoh. The pharaoh was not simply a king in the ordinary sense. He was seen as a sacred ruler, closely tied to divine order. Egyptian political life was built on the idea that the pharaoh maintained balance, order, and harmony in the world, what the Egyptians called Ma'at. This gave Egyptian kingship extraordinary symbolic power. The state, religion, and cosmic order were deeply intertwined. This is one of the reasons ancient Egypt appeared so stable for so long. Its political authority was not only military or administrative, it was sacred. The early period of great state building reached one of its most famous heights during the Old Kingdom. This is the age most closely associated with the pyramids. Under powerful rulers, Egypt became capable of organizing enormous labor forces, extracting resources, and building monuments on a scale that still astonishes the world today. The pyramids of Giza became the greatest symbols of this age. These were not random tombs or isolated structures. They were statements of power, order, belief, and state capacity. They showed that ancient Egypt could mobilize immense resources in the service of royal and religious ideology. Even today, the pyramids remain among the most famous structures ever built by human hands. But Egypt was never only about monuments. It was a civilization of administrators, priests, farmers, craftsmen, scribes, architects, and laborers. It developed writing in the form of hieroglyphs. It created systems of taxation, record-keeping, and governance. It cultivated deep religious traditions centered on gods, the afterlife, and the divine rhythm of existence. Religion was everywhere in Egyptian life. The gods were believed to govern nature, kingship, fertility, death, and the order of the universe. Temples became centers of power, wealth, and ritual. Priests played important roles. Burial practices reflected an extraordinary concern with death and continuity beyond death. This is why mummification became so important. The Egyptians believed that preserving the body helped prepare the dead for the afterlife. Tombs were filled with goods, offerings, inscriptions, and sacred protections. Death was not seen as an ending alone, but as a transition into another realm. This vision of the afterlife became one of the defining features of Egyptian civilization. Yet for all its grandeur, Egypt was not permanently stable. Centralized power could weaken, dynasties could collapse, regional elites could rise. Famine, political fragmentation, and succession crises could disrupt royal authority. This happened more than once. After the Old Kingdom, Egypt entered a time of weakening and division known as the First Intermediate Period. This reminds us of something important. Even one of the greatest civilizations in history was not immune to instability. But Egypt had a remarkable capacity for recovery. The Middle Kingdom marked a period of reunification, renewed authority, and cultural flourishing. Kings restored order, strengthened the state, and reasserted royal power. Egypt once again became stable and powerful. Then, later, came another period of disruption. Foreign influence and internal weakness opened the door for the Hyksos, a group who gained control over parts of Egypt. This was a humiliating and transformative moment, but it also changed Egypt militarily. The Egyptians learned from outside powers, adopted new methods and technologies, and eventually drove the Hyksos out. That victory helped usher in the new kingdom, the Age of Imperial Egypt. This was one of the greatest eras in Egyptian history. Egypt was no longer just a wealthy river kingdom. It became a major regional power. Its armies campaigned abroad. Its wealth expanded. Its diplomacy reached foreign courts. Its rulers projected power beyond the Nile Valley. This was the age of some of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. Among them was Hatshepsut, one of the most remarkable rulers in Egyptian history. As a female pharaoh, she ruled with skill and authority, promoted trade, sponsored monumental building, and demonstrated that Egyptian kingship could adapt in extraordinary ways. Then came Thutmose III, often seen as one of Egypt's greatest warrior kings. Under him, Egypt expanded further and became a true imperial force. And then, perhaps most famously of all, came Akhenaten. Akhenaten attempted something radical. He tried to reshape Egyptian religion around the worship of the Aten, elevating one god above the traditional system. This was one of the boldest religious transformations ever attempted in ancient Egypt, but it did not last. After his death, the old religious order returned. This episode revealed both the power and the limits of royal authority. Even pharaohs could not always permanently remake Egyptian civilization. Another famous figure followed, Tutankhamun. Though he was not one of the most powerful rulers in Egyptian history, he became the most famous in modern imagination because of the discovery of his tomb. The treasures found there helped revive global fascination with ancient Egypt and turned Tutankhamun into one of the most recognizable names of the ancient world. Then came Ramses II, often regarded as one of Egypt's greatest and most powerful pharaohs. Under Ramses, Egypt displayed military force, monumental ambition, and royal magnificence at the highest level. His statues, temples, and inscriptions projected strength across the kingdom. By this stage, Egypt was one of the great civilizations of the ancient world. Its political traditions were ancient, its religion was deeply rooted, its art was iconic, its monuments were monumental, its rulers were legendary. And yet, like all great powers, Egypt faced long-term pressures. Maintaining empire was difficult. Succession could be unstable. Foreign rivals became stronger. Economic and political systems came under strain. Over time, the new kingdom weakened. After that, Egypt experienced periods of fragmentation, foreign influence, and loss of autonomy. Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians, and later others entered the Egyptian story in powerful ways. Egypt did not vanish, but it became harder and harder for it to remain fully dominant on its own terms. Then came one of the greatest conquerors in history, Alexander the Great. When Alexander conquered Egypt, a new phase began. After his death, Egypt came under the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek ruling house that blended Egyptian and Hellenistic traditions. This period was different from the world of the ancient pharaohs, but Egypt remained enormously important. Alexandria became one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, a center of trade, learning, and culture. The famous Library of Alexandria became a symbol of knowledge and intellectual ambition. Then, in the final phase of this story, came Cleopatra. Cleopatra has become one of the most famous women in world history. She ruled in the last age of independent Egyptian monarchy and became deeply entangled in the struggles of Rome. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony tied Egypt to the fate of the Roman world. When Cleopatra fell, Egypt's independence ended. In 30 BC, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. This marked the end of ancient Egypt as an independent civilization ruled by its own monarchs. But the civilization did not disappear from history. Its monuments remained, its symbols remained, its myths remained, its achievements remained, and its legacy became almost impossible to ignore. Ancient Egypt shaped architecture, kingship, religion, art, writing, and the human imagination. For thousands of years, people have looked back at Egypt with awe, curiosity, and admiration. Why? Because Egypt feels both familiar and distant. It was deeply human, full of politics, work, fear, ambition, faith, and power. But it also feels grand, mysterious, and almost timeless. That is part of what makes Egypt so compelling. It was not just old, it was enduring. For thousands of years, Egypt maintained identity, order, and continuity in a way that very few civilizations ever achieved. A river kingdom became a centralized monarchy. A monarchy became a monument-building civilization. A civilization became an empire weakened under pressure. And in the end, even after losing independence, Egypt remained immortal in memory. That arc is one of the greatest stories in world history. Ancient Egypt still fascinates the world because it represents something larger than itself. It represents permanence. It represents sacred power. It represents human ambition written in stone. And even now, thousands of years later, its monuments still stand in the desert, reminding us that some civilizations do not merely exist in history. They define it. So now tell me what you think. What is the most fascinating part of ancient Egypt? The pyramids, the pharaohs, or the mystery of the afterlife? If you enjoyed this documentary, like the video, subscribe for more, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story about the nations, empires, and civilizations that shaped our world. Because to understand the present, we have to understand the past. And few stories make that clearer than the story of ancient Egypt.